Forget the theatrical music and the shouting matches. A sitting member of Congress just walked to the front of the House chamber and placed a stack of documents on the desk that could shatter the American system. Inside that stack are formal articles of impeachment accusing the former and potentially future president of systematically dismantling the republic. This is not a Twitter feud. This is a structural confrontation. And if you think this is just noise, look at what happens to your 401k and your tax dollars when political guardrails finally snap. Welcome back. Today we are unpacking the political firestorm ignited by Representatives Shri Thanadar and Al Green. We are going to strip away the partisan screaming and expose a quiet reaction from Democratic leadership that tells you everything about the fear in Washington. We will break down why abuse of emergency powers is not just a legal theory, it is a direct threat to your wallet. I am Daniel Kershaw, an independent legal and political journalist. I don't work for any party, I don't consult for any campaign, and I don't tell you how to vote. My job is to follow the facts, the law, and the Constitution wherever they lead. So before we dive into the legal heavy lifting, ask yourself this. If the people we elect to protect the Constitution decide that political survival is more important than the law, what protection do you actually have left when the government decides to come for your rights? Let us start with the hard facts stripped of the late-night jokes. Multiple members of the House have formally declared that Donald Trump is a danger to the Republic. This wasn't a tweet, it was a procedural act. Congressman Shri Thanadar from Michigan was one of the first to move. He didn't wait for a committee. He filed articles tying the former president to specific abuses, obstruction of justice, corruption, and a deliberate effort to bend the machinery of government to his personal will. Then you have Congressman Al Green from Texas. If you follow congressional history, you know Al Green is not someone who asks for permission. He has been censured before. He has been treated as a nuisance by his own colleagues. Yet he returned to the battlefield, drafting new articles and promising to move them forward on a strict timetable before Christmas. Now here is where it gets interesting from a strategic perspective. You would think, in a polarized environment, the Democratic leadership would rally behind these moves. They did not. In fact, they did the opposite. Behind closed doors, party leaders quietly pressured Thanadar to pull back. They told him to slow down. They effectively forced him to stop short of forcing a vote. Why? Because they are afraid. They aren't afraid of the facts, they are afraid of the politics. They are terrified that a failed impeachment effort will energize Trump's base, just like it arguably did in the past. They are calculating that law matters less than optics. But Al Green refused to retreat. He views this through a lens that many in Washington are trying to ignore, the lens of an authoritarian project unfolding in real time. Green isn't looking at polling data. He's looking at a pattern of behavior attacking judges, ignoring court orders, using emergency powers that looks uncomfortably familiar to anyone who studies how democracies fail. But to understand why he's willing to stand alone, we have to look at what is actually in those documents. Because the charges aren't just about the past, they are a warning about the future. Let's get specific. The media often glosses over the legalese, but the details here matter. The articles of impeachment focus on 4 distinct buckets of conduct that should alarm every American, regardless of your party affiliation. The first major charge is the misuse of emergency declarations. The president has discovered a loophole by declaring a national emergency. He can bypass Congress to reallocate money, impose tariffs, or seize control of industries. Think about that for a second. The Constitution says Congress controls the money that's your money. But if a president can simply say emergency and spend billions on a pet project that Congress rejected, the legislative branch becomes nothing more than an expensive audience. This ties directly into the second point, usurping congressional authority. The founders gave the power of the purse to Congress to prevent a king from taxing the people to fund his own wars or palaces. The allegation here is that the executive branch is systematically stealing that power back. Then there is the violation of free speech in the press. The articles accuse the president of using the bully pulpit not just to criticize, but to incite harassment against private citizens and the press, effectively weaponizing the office to silence dissent. Finally, corruption and emoluments. This is the old-fashioned term for bribery or improper benefits. The charge is that the presidency was used as a vehicle for personal enrichment, steering government money to his own properties or accepting benefits from foreign actors. Now, if you listen to the response from Trump's allies, you will notice a very specific strategy. They rarely engage with the substance of these charges. They don't walk through the articles line by line and say, here is why this emergency declaration was legal under the 1976 National Emergencies Act. Instead, they hit the emotional buttons. It's a witch hunt. It's a partisan stunt. They hate you. From a power politics perspective, this is smart. In a polarized system, you don't need to win the legal argument, you just need to hold your coalition together. As long as the base believes the system is rigged, the facts of the indictment don't matter. But here's the danger, and this is something realism scholars like John Mearsheimer warn about. When political actors stop arguing about facts and law and shift entirely to loyalty and identity, the guardrails of the Constitution begin to bend. The Constitution relies on competing centers of power. The courts check the president, Congress checks them both. But if one party decides that loyalty to the leader is more important than loyalty to the institution, the system breaks. And if you think this is just an abstract debate for law professors, you are missing the most critical part of the story. Because when these guardrails break, the debris hits your house. Let me explain how. It is easy to hear about war powers or emoluments and tune out. It sounds like inside baseball. But let's translate this into the reality of a 30-something American trying to build a life. Markets hate unpredictable power. Investors from giants like Warren Buffett to the manager of your local pension fund build their plans on one assumption. Rules matter. Contracts will be enforced. The government won't change the terms of trade on a Tuesday night because the president got angry at a CEO. When the presidency becomes a vehicle for improvisation, declaring emergencies to slap tariffs on goods or punish specific companies, businesses have to price in that risk. What does that mean for you? It means higher borrowing costs. It means companies hesitate to hire. It means your 401k becomes more volatile. If you are worried about your mortgage or the cost of living, you should be terrified of a system where one man can rewrite economic policy by tweet. Then there is the war powers impact. In a classic democracy, the legislature declares war. Why? Because the founders knew that giving one person the power to send the nation into combat was a recipe for disaster. The impeachment articles highlight instances where military action was threatened or ordered via social media, bypassing Congress entirely. If you have a son or daughter of military age, this isn't politics. This is personal. It affects whether your child could be sent to fight in a conflict that was never debated, never authorized, and never voted on by your representatives. It puts the lives of American troops in the hands of impulsive decision-making rather than strategic consensus. Finally, ask yourself this. What happens to your sense of safety when the concept of justice becomes political? If you get a speeding ticket or forget to pay your taxes, the law comes for you immediately. But if we establish a precedent that the president can ignore court orders, ignore subpoenas, and attack judges without consequence, we are creating a two-tiered system. A society where the powerful are immune is a society where the weak, that's us, the ordinary citizens, are vulnerable. If the law doesn't bind the king, eventually it won't protect the peasant. But the damage doesn't stop at the water's edge. While we are arguing about this in Washington, our rivals in Moscow and Beijing are watching with delight, and what they are seeing should keep you up at night. Let's widen the lens. The United States is still the most powerful state in the international system, but that power rests on our reputation for stability. When that reputation erodes, bad things happen. Imagine you are Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping. You are watching the U.S. president bypass Congress, berate his own judges, and treat emergency powers as a personal toolkit. What do you conclude? You conclude that American foreign policy is unstable. You conclude that the U.S. is distracted by internal chaos. This encourages aggression. It encourages them to test boundaries in Ukraine, in Taiwan, in the South China Sea. And look at our allies. Consider Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is fighting for his country's survival, banking on the belief that the United States is a reliable partner. But if American politics spirals into a permanent constitutional crisis where treaties are ignored and foreign policy is driven by domestic political drama, allies will start to hedge. They will cut deals with China. They will appease Russia. In the long run, this destroys the international order that has kept major power wars at bay since 1945. That directly impacts the safety and prosperity of the United States. This brings us back to the fascinating split inside the Democratic Party, which tells us so much about the realist versus idealist struggle. On one side, you have the progressives like Al Green. They believe the Constitution is meaningless if Congress won't use its most serious tool, impeachment, when high crimes are committed. To them, failing to act is an act of cowardice. On the other side, you have the moderates. They are thinking in cold, hard electoral terms. They fear that another impeachment will distract from bread and butter issues like inflation and jobs. They worry it will cost them the House. Here is the tragedy. Both sides are right. The progressives are right about the long-term damage to democracy if norms are erased. The moderates are right about the short-term political risks. The result is paralysis. A Congress that is terrified of its own shadow at exactly the moment when clarity is needed most. Meanwhile, the Republicans have mostly closed ranks. They frame Trump not as a powerful executive who needs restraining, but as a victim. They are making a strategic bet that the benefits of loyalty to the leader outweigh the risks of enabling an unbound presidency. This creates a dynamic that political scientists call competitive authoritarianism. This is where you still have elections and courts and a parliament on paper. But the ruling power uses the state to tilt the playing field so heavily that real competition slowly dies. We've seen this in Hungary, we've seen it in Turkey, and now the warning lights are flashing here. So, if the Senate will never convict, and if the House leadership is scared to vote, why do these impeachment articles matter? Why are we even talking about this? Here is the realist answer. Impeachment creates a formal historical record. It forces members of Congress to put their names next to a decision. It educates the public about exactly how power has been stretched. It lays the groundwork for the future. The Trump camp knows this. That's why they fight the narrative so hard. They know that once a president is formally impeached, that stain never washes out. It damages their moral standing not just in history books, but in international disputes and legal arguments for decades to come. But at a deeper level, this drama forces you to confront the question many would prefer to avoid. Is anyone above the law in this country or not? If impeachment becomes just a symbolic exercise theater with no teeth, citizens learn a dangerous lesson. They learn that with enough power and enough partisan cover, the law bends. That lesson feeds cynicism. Cynicism feeds disengagement. And disengagement is the open door that authoritarianism walks through. First, understand that none of this is normal. It is not normal for a president to attack judges. It is not normal for emergency powers to be used as political tools. If you start to shrug and say that's just politics, you have already lost a part of your democracy. Second, recognize that this domestic fight is tied to questions of war and peace. An unconstrained president at home is a reckless president abroad. And third, remember that the Constitution is not a magical shield. It is just a piece of paper. It only has power if people, legislators, judges, and citizens like you insist on following it. The United States is not exempt from the laws of political gravity. Empires rise and democracies fall. There is no guarantee that we get a happy ending. The choice between a flawed but functioning republic and a personalized system of rule is being made right now, not just in the halls of Congress, but in how much attention we are willing to pay. My friends, if you have stayed with me through this heavy analysis, thank you. You are a part of the minority of people willing to look past the slogans and confront the structural reality of American politics. I want to hear from you in the comments below, and I'm asking you to think like a historian, not a partisan. Where is the line for you? At what point does a president's use of emergency power cross from being decisive to being dangerous for your own personal freedom? If this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture beyond the shouting matches, please consider subscribing to the channel. We are going to keep tracking these constitutional fault lines because, unlike the cable news cycle, we know the story isn't going away. I'm Daniel Kershaw. Thank you for watching, thank you for thinking, and remember, democracy only survives when ordinary people refuse to look away. Take care.